Sarah Collins thought she knew everything about her husband, Mark, until the night she uncovered his secret affair and vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a blood-stained garage and a trail of lies that would unravel an entire life built on deception. Sarah Collins was the kind of woman everyone in her suburban neighborhood seemed to know. She had a quiet grace about her, the kind that made people stop and smile when she passed by. Every morning she packed lunches for her 2 children, waved goodbye to her husband Mark as he left for work, and headed to her job at the local library. To outsiders, the Collins family looked like the picture of happiness. They had a neat home, a small garden Sarah took pride in, and a marriage that appeared steady and affectionate. But what no one saw were the cracks forming beneath the surface. Cracks that would eventually swallow Sarah's peaceful world whole. It started subtly, almost too quietly to notice. Mark began staying late at the office more often, claiming that new clients were keeping him busy. Sarah didn't question it at first. She knew how demanding his real estate work could be, but soon the late nights turned into weekends away. He would return home tired and distracted, sometimes irritable, sometimes overly affectionate, as if trying to make up for something. Sarah's intuition whispered that something wasn't right, but she pushed the thought away, convincing herself that every marriage had rough patches. Then the small details began to pile up. She found lipstick stains on his collar, the faint trace of perfume that wasn't hers, and hotel receipts tucked away in his jacket pocket. The dates didn't match any of his supposed business trips. One night, while doing laundry, she noticed his phone buzzing repeatedly. The name flashing on the screen was unfamiliar. Jay. When she picked it up, the messages were gone, deleted so cleanly it was as if they'd never existed. But her heart knew what her mind didn't want to accept. Mark was hiding something. Sarah tried to suppress her suspicions for the sake of her children, but her unease became impossible to ignore. She began keeping a small notebook where she jotted down details, dates, times, and odd behaviors. Every missed call, every unexplained absence, every vague excuse was recorded. It wasn't anger that guided her, but fear. She wanted to understand who her husband had become and why. Those quiet evenings when Mark sat across from her at dinner, staring blankly into his phone, filled her with a cold emptiness. By early summer, Sarah had become withdrawn. Her friends noticed the change but assumed she was just tired. She no longer smiled as easily, and her once bright eyes looked shadowed. She stopped volunteering at the library's weekend programs and spent more time at home, scrolling through old photos of happier days. In one of them, she and Mark were laughing by the lake, their children splashing in the background. It was taken just 3 years ago, but it felt like a lifetime away. Her sister Emily was the only person Sarah confided in. During their last phone call, Sarah admitted that she had proof of Mark's affair and planned to confront him that Friday night once the kids were asleep. Emily offered to come over, but Sarah said it wasn't necessary. She wanted to handle it calmly, to hear the truth straight from her husband's mouth. She even said she was willing to forgive him if he was honest. Emily remembered that Sarah's voice trembled slightly, but she sounded determined. It would be the last time they spoke. Friday evening came, and neighbors later recalled seeing Sarah watering her plants at dusk, humming softly to herself. The lights in the Collins house went out around 10:30 p.m., and everything seemed normal. But by Saturday morning, Sarah was gone. Her car was still in the driveway, her purse missing, and her phone turned off. Mark told police she'd gone for an early walk and never returned. The search began almost immediately, with volunteers combing through nearby parks and wooded areas. But as the hours passed, it became clear that this wasn't an ordinary disappearance. Sarah's notebook, discovered later by investigators, revealed her growing suspicions and the evidence she'd quietly collected. The final entry was dated the night she vanished. It read only one sentence: "Tonight I'll finally know the truth." The morning Sarah disappeared, the neighborhood was still wrapped in silence. A few early risers remembered seeing Mark pacing on the porch, his phone pressed tightly against his ear, his face pale. When police arrived after his call, he appeared nervous but cooperative, insisting that his wife had gone for her usual morning walk and never returned. He told them she often took long routes through the nearby park to clear her mind. The officers noted his trembling hands and the way his eyes darted toward the house every few seconds, as if something inside demanded his attention. At first, his story sounded believable. Sarah's shoes and jacket were missing, and there were footprints leading toward the street. Her phone and purse were nowhere to be found, suggesting she might have taken them with her. Friends and neighbors joined the search, posting flyers and checking nearby trails. For the first 24 hours, everyone hoped she'd simply gotten lost or taken a short trip to calm down. But when her phone was discovered that afternoon in a trash bin off the highway, screen shattered, battery removed, the optimism vanished. The discovery was unsettling, and investigators began to question how a simple morning walk could end this way. As detectives dug deeper, inconsistencies in Mark's account began to surface. Security footage from a nearby traffic camera showed his car leaving the neighborhood at 3:14 a.m., nearly 3 hours before he claimed to have woken up. When questioned about it, Mark hesitated, then claimed he couldn't sleep and decided to drive around to clear his mind. The explanation did little to convince investigators. They noted how his timeline shifted slightly each time he was interviewed, as if he were trying to memorize a story that didn't belong to him. Meanwhile, Sarah's family grew restless. Her sister Emily, who had spoken to her the night before, was certain Sarah wouldn't have left voluntarily. She described her as frightened but determined to confront Mark about his affair. That detail immediately drew detectives' attention. When they searched Mark's phone records, they found multiple late-night calls and text messages to a woman named Jenna Reeves, one of his co-workers at the real estate office. Further investigation revealed that Mark and Jenna had been involved in a romantic relationship for nearly a year. The two were frequently seen together at work events and had even taken trips under the guise of business conferences. When detectives brought Jenna in for questioning, she appeared nervous and avoided eye contact. She admitted that she and Mark had been seeing each other, but insisted she knew nothing about Sarah's disappearance. She said Mark had promised her that he was planning to leave his wife soon, claiming that the marriage had been over for years. When detectives asked when she last saw him, she said 2 nights before Sarah vanished. According to Jenna, Mark had seemed unusually tense, telling her that everything would be different soon. The statement sent chills through the investigation team. Detectives then searched Mark's office computer and uncovered several deleted files, including emails exchanged with Jenna that hinted at future plans together. One message from Mark read, "Once everything is settled, we can finally be free." Another said, "She suspects something. I need to take care of it." The tone of the messages grew darker as the days went on, suggesting a man under mounting pressure. When police revisited the Collins home for a second search, they found a few curious details. The trunk of Mark's car smelled strongly of bleach, and the carpeted area inside appeared freshly cleaned. There was a small section of garage floor that had been scrubbed so thoroughly, the concrete looked discolored. Mark dismissed it as a routine cleaning, claiming he had spilled motor oil. But the explanation seemed too convenient, especially when forensic experts noted traces of what appeared to be blood residue near the drain. The investigation began to shift from a missing person case to a potential homicide. Local media swarmed the neighborhood, filming every police car that arrived and interviewing neighbors who described Mark as quiet but strange. The image of the perfect husband was quickly unraveling. Behind the walls of their neatly kept home, something terrible had happened, something Mark was desperate to hide. Detectives continued to question Jenna, pressing her for any detail that could shed light on Mark's behavior. Eventually, she broke down, admitting that he had called her the night Sarah went missing. He sounded nervous, almost frantic, and told her not to contact him for a few days. He said it's done before hanging up. That single phrase would become the key that changed the course of the investigation. By the end of that week, police were convinced Sarah's disappearance was no accident. The evidence was pointing directly toward Mark Collins, a husband whose secret affair had spiraled into something far darker than anyone could have imagined. The investigation into Sarah Collins's disappearance intensified as police pieced together the timeline of her final night. Each new clue painted a more disturbing picture of what had happened inside the Collins home. Detectives obtained a search warrant to comb through every inch of the property, and what they found shattered the illusion of Mark's innocence. The house was spotless, too spotless. Every surface gleamed, the air thick with the faint scent of disinfectant. The living room carpet appeared recently shampooed, and the garage floor had patches that looked freshly scrubbed. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed like a man coping with grief by cleaning. To the detectives, it looked like an attempt to erase something terrible. When forensic experts sprayed luminol on the garage floor, faint blue stains began to glow under the ultraviolet light. They formed irregular patterns, smears and droplets that suggested blood had been cleaned up hastily. Samples were collected, and within days the results confirmed everyone's worst fear. The blood belonged to Sarah Collins. The finding transformed the case from a search for a missing woman into a murder investigation. Investigators next focused on Mark's car, a silver sedan that had been seen on the traffic cameras hours before Sarah was reported missing. Inside the trunk, police found fibers that matched the carpet from the Collins garage and traces of the same cleaning chemical used on the floor. A small piece of fabric was wedged behind the back seat, and lab tests confirmed it was from a shirt Sarah had worn frequently. The evidence was stacking up, and the story Mark told was crumbling under its weight. But what disturbed detectives most wasn't just the physical evidence. It was what they found on Mark's personal laptop. Buried within a folder titled Work Projects was a hidden subfolder named Plan B. Inside were detailed notes, maps, and a list of motel addresses spread across different towns. There were also screenshots of online searches such as how to start a new life and how long before someone is declared dead. Investigators believed Mark had been planning an escape, perhaps even preparing for life after his wife's disappearance. Among the files was a draft of an email he never sent, written to Jenna Reeves. It read, "It's over. I'll call you when it's safe." When detectives confronted Jenna again, she looked shaken. She admitted that Mark had contacted her days before Sarah vanished, saying he needed a little more time to sort things out. After the disappearance, he texted her once more, saying only, "Everything's handled. Don't reach out." She said she didn't understand what he meant, but had a feeling something was terribly wrong. Jenna's cooperation helped police piece together the timeline, but it also exposed how deep Mark's deceit ran. He had managed to convince her that he was a victim of an unhappy marriage, trapped and desperate, when in reality he was orchestrating a plan that seemed cold and deliberate. Public interest in the case exploded. News channels replayed footage of police carrying boxes from the Collins home, and tabloids labeled Mark the husband with too many secrets. Former clients and friends spoke about how charming he had always been, how he could sell anyone anything. But that charm now looked sinister, like a mask that had finally slipped. Detectives brought Mark in for a final round of questioning. This time, they confronted him with the evidence. The blood, the messages, the digital trail. He maintained his innocence, insisting he had nothing to do with Sarah's disappearance and that she must have left on her own. But when officers presented the results of the DNA tests and showed him the photographs of the garage under luminol, his composure cracked for the first time. He buried his face in his hands, whispering that things got out of control. It wasn't a confession, but it was enough to secure his arrest. Mark Collins was charged with the murder of his wife even though her body had not been found. Prosecutors built their case around the mountain of circumstantial evidence, while the community mourned the woman they believed had been lost forever. But as detectives prepared for trial, something unexpected happened. A discovery that would soon turn everything they thought they knew upside down. 3 weeks after Mark Collins was charged with his wife's murder, the town of Brookfield had settled into a grim rhythm. The story had dominated every news channel, with reporters camped outside the courthouse and neighbors whispering about the tragedy that had shattered their quiet street. Sarah's family had already begun planning a memorial service, convinced she was gone forever. But on a misty Thursday morning, a call from a park ranger 50 miles north of town changed everything. A woman had been found wandering near an abandoned cabin in the woods, disoriented, weak, and terrified. It was Sarah Collins. When she was discovered, Sarah could barely speak. Her clothes were torn, her skin scraped from brambles, and her face pale with exhaustion. She was rushed to a nearby hospital, where doctors confirmed she had been surviving on rainwater and wild berries. News of her survival spread faster than anyone could comprehend. Reporters flooded the hospital parking lot, desperate for a glimpse of the woman whose supposed murder had gripped the entire state. Behind the closed doors of her recovery room, detectives listened in silence as Sarah slowly recounted what had happened the night she disappeared. According to her account, the confrontation she planned that Friday night did happen, but it didn't go as she imagined. After putting her children to bed, she confronted Mark with the evidence she had gathered: the receipts, the messages, the hotel stays. For a moment she thought he would come clean. Instead, his expression changed, his calm demeanor breaking into something darker. The argument escalated. He accused her of ruining his life, of trying to take the children away. When she threatened to leave him and go to the police, he snapped. Sarah remembered a sudden blow to her head and everything going dark. When she regained consciousness, she was in the trunk of Mark's car. Her wrists were bound with zip ties, her mouth taped shut. The car was moving, the sound of tires crunching gravel echoing in the silence. She pretended to remain unconscious, afraid that any movement might push him to violence again. At one point, the car stopped. She heard him talking on the phone, his voice low and steady, saying, "It's done. I'll take care of the rest." Panic surged through her, but she stayed still, waiting. When he opened the trunk briefly, she caught a glimpse of trees and darkness. They were somewhere far from home. Eventually, Mark stopped again, this time for longer. He got out, slammed the door, and walked away from the car. That was when Sarah acted. She struggled against the zip ties, managing to snap one against the edge of a broken latch. The pain tore at her skin, but she kept going until she was free. Without looking back, she ran into the woods, barefoot and terrified. The night was freezing and the forest seemed endless. She stumbled through thorns and mud, certain Mark was following her. She could hear his footsteps at times, his voice echoing in the distance calling her name, but she didn't stop. Sarah wandered for hours, eventually finding a small hunting cabin deep in the forest. The place was old and empty, its walls covered in dust, but it offered shelter. For days, she stayed hidden, surviving on rainwater she collected in a rusty pan and berries from nearby bushes. She had no phone, no food, and no sense of direction. Every sound outside made her heart race. She believed Mark was still out there searching for her, waiting to finish what he started. Only when hunger and exhaustion became unbearable did she venture out, hoping to find a road. That was when a park ranger spotted her, thin, trembling, and barely conscious. Sarah's survival stunned everyone. Detectives immediately traveled to the hospital to hear her full story, documenting every detail. Her testimony changed the entire course of the case. What had seemed like a cold-blooded murder now unfolded as an attempted one, a crime of control and rage that Sarah had miraculously escaped. Mark's lies began to collapse completely. The same evidence he used to claim his innocence now, tied directly to her account. The bleach in the garage, the blood on the floor, and the drive caught on camera in the early hours. Everything matched. For the first time since the nightmare began, Sarah felt safe. She knew the road ahead would be long, filled with court hearings and reliving moments she wanted to forget. But she had survived something most wouldn't. The Yao world now saw her not as a victim but as a survivor who had outwitted death itself. Mark Collins' trial began 6 months after Sarah's miraculous reappearance, and by then the story had become a national obsession. News outlets followed every moment, calling it the case that defied logic. The courtroom was packed, with reporters, true crime podcasters, and curious locals who wanted to see the man accused of trying to kill his wife. Mark walked in wearing a gray suit and a forced calmness that failed to hide the tension in his face. He had lost weight in prison, and his once polished demeanor had been replaced by a cold, hollow stare. The man who once sold homes with a charming smile now stood accused of nearly destroying his own. The prosecution built a meticulous case outlining how Mark's affair with Jenna Reeves spiraled into obsession and desperation. They argued that his motive was clear. He wanted freedom without the burden of divorce or scandal. Financial. Records showed that Sarah had recently inherited money from her late parents, and Mark stood to gain access to it if she were gone. The prosecutors laid out a chilling sequence of events: the confrontation, the violent attack, the cleanup in the garage, and the early morning drive caught on surveillance cameras. They presented the deleted messages, the Plan B folder, and the traces of Sarah's blood found at their home. Piece by piece, they reconstructed a night of betrayal and brutality. When Sarah took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Her voice trembled at first, but her words carried strength. She described the terror of waking up bound in her husband's car, her escape into the dark woods, and the endless nights she spent hiding in fear. Every detail left the jury visibly shaken. Her testimony turned the tide completely, transforming what could have been a case of reasonable doubt into an undeniable account of survival. The defense attempted to paint her story as exaggerated, suggesting that her head injury had distorted her memory. But their argument fell apart under the weight of forensic evidence. Jenna Reeves also testified, revealing that Mark had manipulated her with promises of a new life together. She told the court how he had called her the night Sarah vanished, saying, "It's done," and instructing her not to contact him. Her eyes filled with tears as she admitted she had believed him when he said his wife had left voluntarily. Jenna's testimony shattered any remaining illusion of Mark's innocence. What emerged was the portrait of a man capable of deception, control, and calculated violence. During the closing statements, the prosecution described Sarah as a symbol of resilience, a woman who refused to become another name in a tragic story. They called Mark a man consumed by selfishness, who saw his wife not as a person, but as an obstacle. The defense clung to technicalities, arguing that the lack of a confession left room for doubt. But when the jury left to deliberate, no one in the courtroom believed Mark would walk free. After just 4 hours, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all counts of attempted murder, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. Mark showed no visible emotion as the judge read the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sarah sat quietly in the front row, her hands clasped tightly together, tears rolling down her cheeks. For the first time in months, she felt the weight of survival lift slightly from her shoulders. Justice, though imperfect, had finally been served. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's story became a national reminder of how hidden darkness can exist behind perfect facades. Documentaries, podcasts, and talk shows revisited every chilling detail, but Sarah herself disappeared from the spotlight. She sold the family home and moved away with her children, changing their names and starting fresh in a small coastal town. She avoided interviews, choosing peace over fame. At night, when the ocean wind rattled her windows, Sarah sometimes thought about how close she had come to losing everything. The fear never completely left her, but neither did her strength. She had endured the unimaginable and lived to tell the truth. Mark's betrayal had nearly ended her life, but it also revealed a side of herself she never knew existed. A quiet, unbreakable resilience. And though the world would always remember the story as one of deception and cruelty, for Sarah it was something else entirely. Proof that even in the darkest moments, survival is possible when the will to live burns stronger than fear.